In the last transmission, we mapped the first attack vector, the algorithm extracting your attention, one microtransaction at a time. We named it the bandwidth tax. But attention is only the surface layer. Today, we go one level deeper into the architecture. Because the same system that steals your attention has a second weapon, one that targets not what you notice, but how well you can think. And this one has a number attached to it. You are working harder than anyone you know. You wake up before sunrise, you stay late, you sacrifice weekends, and yet the numbers never move. The bank account hovers at the same level, week after week. The anxiety does not leave. You tell yourself it is a discipline problem. You tell yourself, try harder. But that is the most dangerous lie the system has ever told you. Because here is what the research actually reveals. In 2013, 2 economists from Harvard and Princeton ran a controlled experiment. They measured something almost no one talks about. They found that chronic financial scarcity, not laziness, not character, not moral failure, temporarily drops your measurable IQ by exactly 13 points. 13. That is not a small number. That is the cognitive equivalent of losing an entire night of sleep or the impairment of clinical alcoholism. And here is the engineering truth beneath that statistic. Scarcity is your brain's processing power pressure. The system does not crash. It keeps running, but it has silently quantized your decision-making precision. You are still generating outputs. You are still making choices. But every single output is running at reduced precision, and you cannot feel the degradation from inside the system. So let me ask you one direct question. When you are drowning in financial worry, are you thinking with your full precision mind? Or are you operating on a system that has already had 13 points quietly extracted, a tax levied against your processing power at precisely the moment you need it most? The algorithm of scarcity has already hacked your hardware. Let's map exactly how. Mullainathan and Shafir named the mechanism the bandwidth tax. Your cognitive bandwidth is not infinite. It is a measurable, finite computational resource, the total processing capacity available for attention, decision-making, and executive function. And here is the critical discovery. Scarcity captures bandwidth, not by choice, not by weakness, by architecture. The moment the system detects a resource deficit, it automatically reallocates processing power towards that single threat signal. In machine learning, this is called overfitting. A model trains too heavily on a specific pattern in the data, to the point where it loses the ability to generalize. It performs perfectly on the training signal it fixated on, but fails catastrophically on everything else. A model overfit to scarcity as its sole training signal will classify every new input through the lens of threat. It cannot see the data points outside its loss landscape. It is blind to possibility. Mullainathan calls this tunneling. The cognitive system narrows its aperture, radically, automatically, involuntarily, and overfits almost all available processing power to the scarcity signal. The tunnel forms. Everything outside the tunnel disappears. Your child's face, the long-term investment, the creative solution 5 steps away, gone. You are now running inference on a system that has overfit to a single input, not enough. High resolution at the center of the tunnel, complete information loss at the periphery. And here is what makes it a true system-level trap. The tunnel causes the exact behaviors that maintain the scarcity. Each poor decision under tunnel conditions generates a new training example. The model updates. The weights shift further towards scarcity. Scarcity breeds scarcity, not because of moral failure, but because a quantized system running overfit inference cannot compute its own way out. This is not poverty. This is a recursive loss function running on degraded hardware. Modern data science has now mapped the mechanics of the trap, but ancient Buddhist philosophers identified the core vulnerability thousands of years earlier. There is a layer of your consciousness that does not think in possibilities. It thinks only in threat gradients. It is permanently running a loss minimization function, not gain maximization. Ancient scholars of mind called it manas, the seventh consciousness. They described it as the great distorter, the layer that takes raw experience data and runs it through a single, compulsive optimization target. Manas was essential on the ancestral savanna. The organism running a strong threat detection loss function survived longer. Pessimism was a fitness advantage, but that ancient optimizer is now running in an environment of entirely different dimensionality, and it is catastrophically miscalibrated. When Manas detects that your bank account is low, it does not evaluate options across the solution space. It enters emergency protocol. It locks all resources. It narrows your inference to a single axis, survival. It whispers into your ear, painting every scenario where things get worse, every path to deeper loss. That whisper is not you, but you cannot distinguish the whisper from yourself. And what does Manas do with every scarcity-driven decision made under tunnel conditions? It stores it. Buddhist philosophy calls this the eighth consciousness, the alaya, the storehouse consciousness. Every panicked financial choice, every decision made with 13 missing precision points, every time the immediate patch was chosen over the systemic fix, these are not forgotten. They are written into the alaya as training data, as scarcity-labeled samples. The model fine-tunes on this dataset epoch after epoch. The weights shift, the prior hardens. The next time the alaya surveys incoming data, it classifies what the training history has prepared it to classify, more evidence of scarcity, garbage in, garbage out, at the level of consciousness itself. The prison walls are invisible because you generated the training data that built them, one panicked inference at a time. Now, let's talk about how you retrain the model. The first instinct when you understand the system is to try to outcompute it, to be more strategic, to think harder, to optimize your way out. But here is the engineering irony. Attempting to think harder inside a bandwidth-constrained, overfit system consumes the very resource the system has already depleted. You're trying to run a more complex model on hardware that is already throttled. The exit is counterintuitive, and it is precisely what the scarcity algorithm does not want you to find. It's called slack, deliberately engineered surplus, not something you earn after you escape the tunnel. Slack must be introduced as a regularization term before the system can generalize beyond the tunnel walls. This can be financial, a small, untouchable reserve that your threat detection system learns to register as a boundary condition. Enough. It can be temporal, 1 hour per week belonging to no urgent task, no loss function, no debt of attention. This is not laziness. This is you manually introducing a regularization term into your cognitive architecture. You are preventing the system from overfitting further. To break the loop, you must step entirely outside the equation. You don't fight the urge to spend. You simply observe it. Create a microsecond gap between the impulse and the action. You must become the silent witness to the scarcity algorithm. The next time the scarcity spiral begins, the next time you feel the tunnel forming, the aperture narrowing, the loss function screaming in your ear, stop. Place your hand on the table. Feel the surface. One breath. This is not metaphor. This is a deliberate dropout interrupt on the manas pathway. You are preventing the forward pass from completing. You are creating the gap where a new training signal can be written. In that gap, the alaya doesn't receive a new scarcity sample. In that gap, you are already fine-tuning on different data. The tunnel requires your continuous inference to maintain its walls. Stop inferring. Let me tell you what you actually are. You are not a person who cannot manage money. You are not undisciplined. You are not fundamentally flawed. You are a high-capacity cognitive system that has been running on throttled hardware, generating overfit inference, training on a corrupted dataset, a tax levied not by any single villain, but by the architecture of scarcity itself. The research is unambiguous. The same individuals who make poor financial decisions under scarcity Make excellent decisions when the scarcity condition is removed. The model was never broken. The training data was. Believe me, the moment you introduce even a single regularization term, the moment you feed the Alaya even one sample labeled sufficiency, the tunnel begins to dissolve at the edges. This is not hope. This is information theory. And the next day, you will discover something remarkable. You made a better financial decision yesterday than you would have made under the tunnel. You looked further ahead. You considered a path you cannot see when you're in the scarcity spiral. This is the proof that the model was never broken. The training data was. Begin fine-tuning. Your attention is not the problem. Your discipline is not the problem. Your training data is. And training data can be rewritten, not through willpower but through architecture. Build the slack before you need it. Introduce the regularization term before the next loss spike. Run the dropout interrupt, one breath, before the Manas pathway completes its forward pass. Save this video as your cognitive interrupt sequence. Run it the next time the scarcity loop begins to execute. And if someone's face just appeared in your mind, that person is running on throttled hardware and does not know it. They are generating poor outputs not because their model is broken, but because their training set is corrupted. Send this to them. We have now mapped 2 attack vectors. The algorithm taxes your attention. Scarcity compresses your intelligence. But there is a third one, and it targets the only time your system has to repair itself. Every night, while you sleep, your brain is supposed to run its most critical maintenance cycle. And every night, Manas finds a way to interrupt it. That is EP03. Take back your bandwidth. Stay sovereign.